And then you've got tree species that are able to withstand that hydro period again. And you'll notice that some of them have a very flared base that buttresses. And that's another characteristic of species that are down in floodplains. They'll have that. The other thing that'll be interesting is to see where trees all of a sudden have no base at all. They're just buried in sediment, and they just kind of rise up. I don't really see any right here that demonstrate that, but there's places where you won't see any flaring at all, and then they're just buried in 3 feet or more of material. Floodplains are very dynamic systems. The Shawnee Hills is that area with the Pennsylvania sandstone bluffs, and they are a characteristic of a portion of this province. And the forest types up here are kind of dry. You see pine here, so there's a lot of species that are growing out on these sandstone tops without much soil underneath them, and so they kind of end up looking kind of gnarled and grizzled and stunted. But you know, that is a natural community type known as the xeric forest or woodland. And again, you don't have to know these terms, just know that there's some really interesting communities running across the entire state. But these are kind of unique to these habitats where you don't have much in the way of soil. So the bedrock, you can see there's bedrock at the surface here. So you have very stunted canopies because you don't have much nutrients, you don't have much water. These trees can be very old, and it's just, you know, their misfortune or good fortune, I guess, depending on how you view it, to be growing on the edge of these bluffs. So a lot of lichens and moss in the understory. Eastern red cedars, which are all the way to here, which you know can grow on rock for the most part. So species that are well adapted to these dry, thin soil conditions are what you will find there. Unlike the floodplain we were just talking about, where you have a lot of moisture, a lot of soil, a lot of nutrients, and you have much different tree species. One of the most unique things that are out on those sandstone bluffs are these glades. And this is where you have practically just bedrock with some thin soil pockets where there might be like a little depression in that bedrock where soil has gathered because rain has washed it in there. They're very early in the successional stages of well, it's a very early successional stage because you basically are starting from rock. But lichens are out here, and some grasses and sedges, and so over time this will cover over this entire exposed rock, but it takes hundreds and hundreds of years for that to occur. And you notice there are no trees out on this because, again, there's practically no soil. If only a moss can grow in it or lichen, you're really having a tough time finding roots.
Is that the process of soil building?
Yes. This is very early successional stage. And you talked about that, I imagine, last week. Succession.
We'll talk about it in this, and we'll talk about soils when we get to the soil section and a little bit of the geology.
Yeah, and you've got a soils expert right there, so you will learn a lot. So moving from the Shawnee Hills, we're in the Highland Rim, which is that big area that wrapped around. And this is where the barrens were, and remnants still are, which are where most of our grasslands are. So again, historically, fire would have swept across these landscapes because there was not a lot of surface water because of the karst, because of those limestone soils that cause those sinking streams to occur. So these places still exist on the landscape, but they need fire to be maintained. So this is one of those disturbance related systems. If you just let these things alone, what's going to happen, because of the amount of rainfall we get in Kentucky every year, these cedar trees are going to advance, and red buds and hackberries and other things are going to get into the soil that is built up, shade these things out, and then you might be lucky enough to walk along in between the cedars and find maybe a couple of the gray-headed coneflowers and go, wow, this was something once, and could be again if you had the time to spend taking all those trees back off. Easier to burn it and maintain it that way. And I can speak from many years' experience, much more fun to do it that way. So we talked about sandstone glades. This is a limestone flat rock glade. Again, a system where you've got bedrock exposed at the surface. In this instance, it's limestones. And you can see there's a nice little margin along here where there's enough soil to support cedar trees. You get back beyond the cedar tree line and you start to see some hickories, and beyond that some oaks. So it's again, very limited natural community on the landscape, and again, that's kind of one of those key things to think about. If it's a limited on the landscape natural community, the species that are found there are more likely going to be rare. And indeed, this little plant here is called flower of an hour, and literally in the summertime when you go and find this thing, if you know what you're looking for, you can find it without it blooming, but it's this high sticking out of the little soil pockets in the rock. That magenta flower is really great when it's blooming, but it only opens for a couple of hours in an afternoon. So you really have to know what you're looking for or get there at the right time of day to see it. And then there's this other little tiny plant, which is a glade cress that grows out in these little soil pockets again. Very rare, very limited distribution in the state. And when you find that, you know you've got a pretty cool site.
So Joyce, the glades are where you find more of the rare species? Is that correct to say?
Yeah, because of the fact that there's not very many of them on the landscape. The ones that are still there, well, that one, when we found it, it had been used as a dump. You know, people have land and they use it however they can. And if you can't grow anything on it or graze animals on it, what else is it good for? Well, the old appliances can go back there when we're done with them. Oh, and we'll let the neighbors dump theirs out there too. So we found this thing. These rare plants were growing up amongst, you know, rusted out old refrigerators and junk and glass. So we cleaned them up and started to, you know, manage the site, and the plants came back in better numbers. We also stopped the ATVs from going through it, which were also grinding up the habitat and making it impossible for the plants to survive. So when you have these isolated community types, it's likely that there'll be species associated with them that aren't common anywhere else in the state. And another thing to think about that, again, I don't have all the time I wish I did, there's insects associated with these habitats. And if you think about a leaf hopper or a grasshopper or maybe sometimes even a moth or a butterfly, if this is your habitat and all this is, you know, no man's land for you, you are going to live here and die here and regenerate here and nowhere else. So if that's cut off and it's 4 acres in size, that's all you get. And so a lot of species are limited in their distribution just because of their own mobility. They can't pass through these forests to find another one of these. They need something that's out here on this landscape in order to live, and they're not going to find it in the woods. So that's another way to look at the rarity on the landscape. How many of you are Louisvillians? Okay. Have you been down to Bullitt County to the Nature Conservancy's Pine Creek Barrens Preserve? Anybody? I will suggest that you go. I wish the Apple Valley Preserve that we have down there was open to the public. I started a trail before I retired, but it didn't get it done. Pine Creek Barrens. It has glades and some really rare plants on it, and you can go walk around out there and see them. And it'll give you a sense of what we're talking about with these confined small areas in the midst of a forest. And that's kind of what these glades are. They're very limited. The bedrock doesn't outcrop everywhere. It only outcrops in a certain area. The other really cool thing about Pine Creek Barrens and our Apple Valley Glade that's right close by is that that's on dolomite limestone. So the plants are even rarer there because we're special. We've just got to have dolomite or we're not growing. So if you're that much of a specialist and you only get on dolomite rock. In Kentucky, this dolomite is only in Bullitt and Jefferson counties, so you're even rarer. There actually is a glade cress in those locations that's on the list of federally threatened species, endangered species, because it's so rare, because of that dolomite requirement. So, you know, when you think of people being a little fussy, there are some plants out there that are majorly fussy. So the knobs. I think practically everybody gets how that got its name. But these conical hills that are there, and you can see this ridge in the background here, are really distinctive. As you drive out of the bluegrass on the parkway, you will see these things. All of a sudden, boink, as you're going down towards Campton and the gorge, you will see these really incredible knobs just rise up on the landscape. And the reason they are there is because it was a plateau, this was all filled in between, that eroded. And these real resistant cap rocks here and here let everything else erode around them. And so you've got these big conical hills out on the landscape just because of erosional forces. And that is one thing. When you also go to the Red River Gorge, you will see these places with this conglomerate and these other big sandstone slabs that are real resistant to erosion, water, rain, ice, and so you get these odd formations. The community types, again, because of those rocky promontories, you'll have these oak pines, and here's our pines and the oaks, and this is a really dry, or called xeric, and you can see the landscape here with the bedrock exposed really is limited as far as the understory species that you'll find. A good place to go is Pilot Knob in Powell County, to get up on a knob to see those beautiful outcrops of the sandstone and conglomerate. And Pilot Knob in Powell County. Powell County, yes. Down towards Stanton, Clay City. Some of these knobs have coves, and again, this is a chance to talk about mesic forests. North-facing slopes, remember I was telling you they don't have as much sun on them, and this is really a pretty picture of just, you know, the shadiness of it all. So the trees here, the soils are a little thicker, they're more moist, there's a little bit more nutrients going on than if you were on the south side of these knobs, and so you'll have an entirely different forest community type. And you remember where this is, Peter? You helped build a trail there.
Vernon Douglas?
That's right. That's right. I'm going to keep this guy on the spot. But you know what? It's good to know he paid attention all those trips.
A little bit.
That's right. Okay, bluegrass region. So, went through the knobs. Here we are. The landscape's level to gently rolling to steep hills and entrenched cliff-lined rivers and streams. And the cliff-lined rivers and streams have to do with the Kentucky River running through the Palisades, and we'll talk about that. There's an outer bluegrass, which comes over here to Louisville, because right here is the knob. So what's down there, real close to you guys, that's knobby? Bernheim. As you drive and you go to Bernheim, you get those nice conical hills at Bernheim. So you're really close to some knobs. You don't have to come all the way over here to Powell County. You can just go to Bernheim and see the knobs.
Is that the knob that continue over into Indiana?
They do. They absolutely do. And Vernon Douglas is down here near Elizabethtown, if you wanted to go there. I love this aerial shot. This is the Palisades from a helicopter, and it really is showing a couple of different things. The inner bluegrass region is flat, 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 not a lot of rolling terrain until you get to the edge of the Kentucky River, and then you see the entrenched river valley here going towards between Frankfort and and the Madison County line. So this portion also shows you how limited we are in forested cover in the bluegrass region. We have pretty much removed forest blocks in the bluegrass region. There's just mostly what's left now is along here. This is the most significant natural community or natural feature in the bluegrass region is the Palisades, but just because there is forest associated with it. And only, as you can see, up to where they couldn't get a plow, which is, you know, like at the precipice of most of this. And a place to go to see this very nicely is the Tom Dorman Nature Preserve down in Garrett County. And this is a picture of the cliffs. If you hike the trail, you can go to the Kentucky River right here and look up at these beautiful cliffs that are almost 300 feet tall on that side. So the entrenchment is of the river cutting down through all of these limestones. And down here at the base of these bluffs is the oldest rock in the state. 450 million year old Ordovician limestones are exposed. It's the oldest rock in Kentucky. And you need to go to the Kentucky River Palisades to see it. Forest types are, as you could see from the other picture, kind of hard to find, but in these associated stream valleys that feed into the Palisades, you'll find these calcareous mesophytic forests. And again, that's a rich, more moist soiled forest that you're maybe used to walking around in with bloodroot and wood poppy and bluebells and May apples. It's very rich spring flora. If you get out and you do some hiking, you're usually walking in this type of a forest. The outer bluegrass region has a little bit more moderate hills and stream valleys. It's nothing like the entrenched Kentucky River Palisades, but there's a little bit more relief going on here than there is in the inner bluegrass, which is pretty flat or gentle. And the other thing that's really cool about the outer bluegrass, we have a nature preserve there in Lincoln County that is the largest remnant grassland known from the bluegrass region, and that's at our Bootaloo Barrens Preserve. And it's really cool to find native grasslands that aren't, you know, these little postage stamp size pieces of ground. But on the landscape in general, there's still not a lot of forested cover in the bluegrass, outer or inner bluegrass regions. But in some places you'll find some native grassland stands still living, which is great. Well, we're making our way across the state. So Appalachian Highlands, province. So we've got the plateau and the mountains. The Appalachian plateaus are really deeply eroded. They're steep hills and really narrow stream valleys. You got sometimes these knife edge ridge tops that come out, but you can see that it's all level. That's what a plateau is, right? It's a landscape where it's level, and you can see that the water, the erosion forces have moved to make dissections through this plateau, but it leaves behind these really steep hills. It leaves behind some really amazing landscape features that are typified by those that you see in the Red River Gorge. And you know, you get these really massive outcrops of sandstone. You get the beautiful scenic arches that are found throughout the Red River Gorge, and that's all these big Pennsylvanian age sandstone formations that are outcropping there. I included this picture. I don't know if anybody has ever seen Bill Fletcher's artwork, but he's a really amazing landscape artist, and he did this painting of Oxear Ridge, which is just, I think, gorgeous. So those are features. If you've been down to Natural Bridge, if you've climbed up there or taken the little whatever that thing is. What is it? Chairlift. Thank you. I couldn't even think of the name. If you take the chairlift up on top, then you're seeing these features up close and personal. And that is one aspect of what goes on the plateau. Cumberland Mountains. The biodiversity here is influenced because the Cumberland Mountains are in the middle of the Appalachian mountain chain. Kentucky's position is such that we have species from further north along the Appalachians that are here, and species from south of our current position that migrate in. So there is a lot of diversity here just because of the location of our mountains in relation to the entire Appalachian chain. This is also an amazing corridor for species movement. I've been down here for hawk watches on the mountain, and so while you're watching the hawks just zooming along that ridge, all of a sudden here comes monarch butterflies just puttering along as fast as they could go. It's an amazing thing to watch these little butterflies. You just saw these hawks whizzing past at I don't know what speed, and then there's little butterflies just heading to Mexico. So these things are really important as far as migration goes. And when you look at the upthrust here, that's just one big long ridge. Pine Mountain is a 123-mile long upthrust ridge. It has a couple of breaks in it for roads, and the Cumberland River punches through it at Pineville. But you're talking about some of the last, most intact natural lands in the state, just because they haven't built roads all over it. Now they have logged the hell out of it, and on Black Mountain they have mined the hell out of it. But because of the upthrust fault of Pine Mountain, the coal was buried and they can't get at it. Or believe me, we wouldn't have Pine Mountain either. But thank God for some geologic disruptions. So as I mentioned, Pine, Cumberland, and Black Mountains are here and included in this region. So there's elevation changes here. Remember how high the highest point of Black Mountain is? 41,000 feet and more. So species that are up there are not going to be down in Paducah, and vice versa. There are conditions that are met at these high elevations with the temperatures and the moisture that allow a number of species to be found here that aren't found elsewhere, including for Kentucky, including the rose begonia orchid, painted trillium, and this little northern bog club moss. So again, you've got some factors that are allowing species to be able to survive these climatic changes. I mean, some of these species, like the painted trillium, is something I've seen up in northern Ohio and Pennsylvania. But because of the conditions we have at the high elevations and the coolness, that thing can grow down in Kentucky, but only on the mountain. Same with these other species. I've seen this orchid up in northern Ohio, but here in Kentucky it's only found on Pine Mountain in a bog. So these conditions have to be met in order for these species to be able to persist on the landscape. Well, I think I've done fairly well as far as not talking too long with this. So I hope that you enjoy your entire course. The public awaits your knowledge and your enthusiasm to get out there and learn about nature with you. And I wish I could take you to all the wonderful places I just showed you and more, but maybe there'd be an opportunity at some point to help direct you in traveling to some of these places and seeing them. But if you have any questions, I'm real happy to answer them. So thank you.
Thank you. So do we have any questions right now? Because we are going to go out to the field here in a minute. All right.
Yes, sir.
Where do we find information about different nature preserve and what we are actually seeing in that?
This is not the best map because it doesn't have actual instructions on how to get there, but if you go online to the Office of Kentucky Nature Preserves, there will be a website there that has the nature preserves and directions on how to get to them. You can also look at the Nature Conservancy's website and get directions to go to their nature preserves. You can go to state parks. You can go to fish and wildlife management areas. So there's a number of organizations that maintain natural areas that you can go and visit.
I think my question is, for example, if I go to a state park or a nature preserve, I don't know like how to find information about history and geography of that specific, what I'm seeing in this or what I should be looking for.
Well, there will be information through each state park that is a resort park has a naturalist, and you can ask them questions about where can I find this, where can I see this. You can ask the people that work at the Nature Preserves Commission or the Fish and Wildlife Department, when's a good time to go see this, where might this be. If it's really rare, they're not going to tell you because you might be the best person in the world and never pick it or take it, but they can't because there's somebody else who would take that information and dig it up and take it home. So within reason, people will, be happy to help you with some of this. And there's information you can read about these species online. And this book right here talks about the species as well. So, make use of information like this. I know especially young people don't like to pick up